It's Sunday night. The Middle East is on fire. Missiles are flying across one of the most volatile regions on Earth. And in London, the British Prime Minister has just made a decision that could change everything. Sir Keir Starmer has given the United States permission to use British military bases to strike Iranian missile sites. Britain, which just days ago stayed out of the US-Israeli military campaign, has now stepped closer to the front line than at any point in this crisis. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly what happened, why Starmer made this call, where those British bases are, what Iran has been doing, and what comes next for the region, and for all of us. Stay with me, because this is one of those moments that history books will remember. To understand this decision, you need to know what's been happening on the ground over the last 48 hours. On Saturday, March 1, 2026, US and Israeli forces launched a wave of strikes against Iran. These were not minor operations. They targeted senior regime officials. In fact, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in one of those airstrikes. That is an extraordinary event by any measure. The death of the supreme leader, the most powerful figure in Iran, sent shockwaves through the region and the world. Iran's response was immediate and fierce. Tehran launched sustained missile and drone attacks, not just at Israel or the United States, but across the entire region. Countries that had nothing to do with the initial strikes were suddenly under bombardment. Airports were hit, hotels were struck. A military base in Bahrain was attacked, narrowly missing British personnel. According to Prime Minister Starmer, British troops were just 200 meters from where one of those missiles landed, and right now, at least 200,000 British citizens are in the Gulf region. Residents, tourists, people in transit, families on holiday, workers, all of them suddenly caught in the middle of a rapidly escalating conflict. Let me take you through exactly what the Prime Minister said, because the precise wording matters here. Starmer began by acknowledging what he said on Saturday, that the UK was not involved in the initial strikes on Iran. He maintained that position. The UK did not start this fight. But then came the pivot. He said, and I'm going to paraphrase closely here, that Iran has, over the last 2 days, launched sustained attacks across the region at countries that did not attack them. Iran has hit airports and hotels where British citizens are staying, and Iran narrowly missed British personnel in Bahrain. Then, the key line. The only way to stop the threat is to destroy the missiles at source, in their storage depots or the launchers which are used to fire them. The United States has requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose. We have taken the decision to accept this request. Notice the language he's using. He calls it defensive. He calls it specific and limited. These aren't accidental word choices. They're carefully selected legal and political framing. Starmer also invoked Iraq, specifically the mistakes of Iraq. He said Britain has learned those lessons. The UK was not involved in the initial strikes and will not join offensive action. And then, significantly, he announced that the government would publish a summary of its legal advice. That's a direct nod to the Iraq War controversy, where the Blair government's legal basis for war was fiercely disputed. He also announced something else that caught my attention. The UK will bring Ukrainian weapons experts to help Gulf partners shoot down Iranian drones. Ukrainian expertise, forged in years of battling Russian drone warfare, is now being deployed in the Middle East. The world is increasingly interconnected in ways we could barely imagine a few years ago. One of the most important questions, and one that Starmer did not answer directly, is which bases are we talking about? The UK has military facilities spread across the region. Let me walk you through the main ones. Diego Garcia. This is the one getting the most attention. It's a joint UK-US military base on the Chagos Archipelago in the Indian Ocean. President Trump has previously mentioned using this base, and it places US B-2 and B-52 bombers within 5,300 kilometers of Iran. That's well within striking range. Strategically, it's the most significant base in play here. It's also worth noting that Iran's Shahed 136 kamikaze drones theoretically have the range to reach Diego Garcia. meaning this isn't a risk-free decision for Britain. Cyprus. The UK has sovereign base areas at Akrotiri and Dhekelia. These have historically been used for operations in the Middle East, including Iraq and Syria, Qatar, UAE, and Oman. Britain has smaller but significant presences in all three Gulf states, countries that are themselves now under Iranian missile and drone attack. The specifics of which bases will be used are likely to remain classified for obvious operational security reasons. But the strategic logic points heavily toward Diego Garcia as the primary platform for any U.S. bomber operations against Iranian missile infrastructure. Now, some of you watching this will be asking, wasn't Britain refusing to do this just days ago? Yes. Reports indicated the UK had previously turned down U.S. requests to use British bases for operations against Iran. So what changed? A few things, in my assessment. First, the threat became personal and direct. It's one thing to stay out of a conflict happening over there. It's another when your troops are 200 meters from a missile strike, when your citizens are in hotels that are being bombed, when your allies in Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait are calling you directly and asking for help. Starmer spoke personally with the kings of Bahrain and Jordan, the Crown Prince of Kuwait, the Sultan of Oman, and the President of Cyprus on Sunday. These weren't abstract diplomatic conversations. These were allied leaders telling Britain that its people and theirs were in danger. Second, the framing shifted. By calling this defensive, targeting missiles at source before they can be fired, Starmer created a legal and moral distinction from joining the offensive campaign. It's a fine line, and critics will argue it's a blurry one. But politically and legally, it gives the government a basis for the decision that doesn't position Britain as a co-aggressor in the initial strikes on Iran. Third, the political pressure was intense. Both the Conservative Party and Reform UK were calling on Starmer to let the US use UK bases. Nigel Farage said the decision was better late than never, while calling Starmer a follower, not a leader. On the other side, the Green Party's Zach Polanski accused Starmer of jumping into an illegal war after one phone call from Donald Trump. Starmer was being squeezed from both directions. Fourth, he also issued a joint statement with France and Germany. The three European powers agreed to support what they described as necessary and proportionate defensive action to destroy Iranian missiles at source. This wasn't Britain going it alone. It was a coordinated Western response. Not everyone is on board with this decision, and it's important we understand the arguments on the other side. The legality question. Green Party leader Zach Polanski said Starmer was dragging Britain into an illegal war. The government is publishing its legal advice summary precisely to address this. The government's position is that this falls under collective self-defense in international law, supporting allies in defending themselves against ongoing missile attacks. But legal scholars will debate this for years. The Iraq shadow. Britain's political class is still haunted by the 2003 Iraq War. The use of legal advice, the insistence on defensive, not offensive framing, the emphasis on protecting civilians, all of this is designed to distance this decision from the Blair government's path into Iraq. Whether it succeeds in that distinction will depend heavily on how events unfold. Escalation risk. Every step deeper into this conflict carries the risk of escalation. Iran has already promised devastating blows in response to the killing of Khamenei. If U.S. bombers fly from British bases to strike Iran, Tehran may well consider that Britain has joined the war, regardless of how London frames it. British citizens, British personnel, and British territory could become targets. The diplomatic track. Starmer himself said the best way forward is a negotiated settlement in which Iran gives up nuclear ambitions. Critics ask, does facilitating military strikes get us closer or further from that negotiated settlement? Let's take a step back and look at Iran's behavior since the strikes began, because context matters enormously here. Iran's supreme leader is dead. Senior regime officials have been killed. The country is in a state of political shock and military alert, and Tehran's response has been what Starmer called a scorched earth strategy. Iran has launched missile and drone attacks not just at Israel and U.S. bases, but at countries that have been neutral: Qatar, Kuwait, northern Iraq, the UAE. These are nations that explicitly had nothing to do with the attacks on Iran, and yet they are being targeted. This is what gives the defensive framing its strongest moral grounding. Iran, in its fury, is not limiting its retaliation to those who attacked it. Innocent civilians, British, American, Arab, and others, are at risk simply because they happen to be in the region. 3 U.S. service members have been killed in operations so far, 5 others seriously wounded. The human cost is already real and rising. British jets have been active in the region since Saturday morning, conducting defensive operations, shooting down Iranian drones targeting northern Iraq and Qatar. Britain was already in this conflict defensively before Sunday's announcement. Sunday's decision extended that involvement to allowing offensive use of its bases. So where does this go from here? Let me give you a few scenarios. Scenario 1. Containment succeeds. U.S. strikes from British bases destroy enough Iranian missile infrastructure to significantly degrade Tehran's ability to fire at its neighbors. Iran, without a supreme leader and under severe military pressure, eventually enters negotiations. The conflict, extraordinarily costly and destructive, is brought to a close through diplomacy. This is the outcome all Western governments are working toward. Scenario 2. Protracted conflict. Iran retaliates against British bases, potentially Diego Garcia, or UK facilities in the Gulf. The conflict drags on for weeks or months. The economic impact on global energy markets is severe. British citizens and troops are caught in a worsening humanitarian situation. Scenario 3. Wider regional conflagration. Other actors enter the conflict. Iran's proxies, in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, escalate dramatically. The conflict expands beyond Iran itself. This is the nightmare scenario that regional leaders like Saudi Arabia are desperately trying to prevent. Saudi Arabia has reportedly told Gulf allies to avoid any steps that could further inflame tensions. The Foreign Office is already working on contingency evacuation plans for the 200,000 British citizens in the Gulf, should airspace remain closed. That tells you something about how seriously London is taking the worst-case possibilities. Step back from the immediate drama for a moment and consider what this moment tells us about the world we're living in. A British Prime Minister who spent months trying to keep Britain out of Middle East military action has, within 48 hours of a major escalation, agreed to open British territory to U.S. bombers heading for Iran. The speed of that shift reflects the speed at which modern conflicts can escalate and how quickly governments can find themselves with no good options left. Ukrainian drone experts are being sent to the Gulf to help shoot down Iranian-made drones that Russia has also been using in Ukraine, a surreal, interconnected feedback loop of 21st-century warfare. France, Germany, and the UK are aligned, at least rhetorically, in supporting this defensive framing. That European unity, combined with U.S. military power, is the Western response. How Iran responds, and who leads Iran in the wake of Khamenei's death, will shape what happens next. A moderate successor might open the door to negotiation. A hardline successor might double down on retaliation. That question, who now holds power in Tehran, may be the most important unknown in this entire crisis. Let me bring it all together. Britain, after days of staying on the sidelines, has allowed the United States to use its military bases to strike Iranian missile infrastructure. This is a significant escalation of British involvement. It was triggered by Iran's decision to attack neutral countries, threaten British lives, and launch sustained regional missile campaigns. Prime Minister Starmer has framed it as defensive, legal, and proportionate, undertaken to protect British citizens and allied nations that did nothing to provoke this war. Critics call it a dangerous step toward an illegal conflict with historical echoes of Iraq. Supporters call it a necessary and overdue response to Iranian aggression. The truth, as always in geopolitics, is more complicated than either position. This is a crisis with no clean choices, only hard ones.